Before we begin, a quick warning. Tennessee True Crime contains detailed descriptions and images of real-life violence. Some listeners and viewers may find the material deeply disturbing. This content is intended for mature audiences only. And remember, the goal of sharing these stories is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims, understand the truth, and give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In Tennessee, evil doesn't always raise its voice. It doesn't kick down doors or leave warnings behind. Sometimes it waits. It sits quietly at the end of a bar, nursing a beer that's long gone warm, watching the room without ever being noticed. It blends in with the wood-paneled walls and neon lights. It doesn't argue. It doesn't flirt. It doesn't stand out. It just waits. On a cool night in the fall of 1995 in Dickson County, Tennessee, that kind of evil was already inside Bronco's Bar. No one there knew it. No one there could have known it. The jukebox played, glasses clinked, last calls were made, and outside, a taxi pulled away. Inside that bar was a woman named Virginia. She wasn't running from anything. She wasn't afraid. She was doing what people do at the end of an ordinary night, gathering her things, ready to go home. A large purse slung over her shoulder, a white bed pillow tucked under her arm, her dog waiting patiently at her feet. And when the cab didn't answer, when the phone rang into silence, she made a decision that felt harmless in the moment. The kind of decision that maybe all of us has made before. She accepted a ride. That choice, made in seconds, would become the last decision of her life. What followed wasn't loud, and it wasn't immediate. It didn't happen under bright lights or watchful eyes. It unfolded slowly and quietly, across dark roads and wooded land. And by the time anyone realized Virginia Jackson was missing, what had already been done could not be undone. Tonight we're telling the story of what happened after the bar closed, after the truck pulled away, after a woman disappeared into the Tennessee night. This is the case of Virginia Jackson. They say the South never forgets, and Tennessee, she remembers everything. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows of the volunteer state's past meet the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Tiffany Morgan. Each week, we dig into twisted tales of betrayal, violence, and mystery. The ones where whispers carry truth, and the answers are never as simple as they seem. Let's step into the dark and piece together the clues. Because in Tennessee, some secrets still haunt the hills. This is Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime.
Let's go back to September 26th, 1995, at Bronco's Bar in Dickson, Tennessee. It was between 8 and 9 p.m. A taxi pulled up outside of the bar. Virginia Jackson stepped out carrying her large purse, a white bed pillow, and wearing multicolored clips in her hair. Her dog followed closely behind her. Witnesses would later remember those details very clearly, not because they were suspicious at all, but because they were so ordinary. Inside the bar, Jerry Ray Davidson was already there. He sat alone, drinking beer, quiet. According to testimony, Jackson and Davidson were not acquainted. At one point, they sat next to each other, but they didn't even speak. Virginia spent the evening talking with bartender Carol Owens and other patrons. She drank 2 beers over several hours. There were no arguments. There was no tension. Nothing that would have warned anyone what was coming. By closing time, only 3 people remained inside of Bronco's bar: Virginia, Jerry Ray Davidson, and the bartender, Carol. Carol tried to call Virginia a cab, but the cab company was closed for the night. And that moment, that one unanswered phone call would echo through the trial years later. Virginia accepted Jerry Ray Davidson's offer for a ride. Now, at around 11:30 p.m., she was last seen alive climbing into Jerry Ray Davidson's red pickup truck, her dog, her purse, and her pillow with her. No one ever saw her again. Days passed. At first, there were explanations. Missed calls happen. People get busy. Sometimes you don't check in when you should. But for Virginia's family, the silence did not feel normal at all. There were no phone calls, no quick check-ins, no sign that she'd made it home. By the 3rd and 4th day, concern settled in, the kind that does not go away when you try and talk yourself out of it. The kind that keeps you glancing at your phone, replaying the last time you spoke, wondering if you might have missed something important. And by October 1st, 1995, that concern had hardened into absolute fear. Virginia wasn't just out of touch. She was gone. Her family did what families do when waiting turns into dread. They called the police and filed a missing persons report. That call set the machinery of an investigation into motion. Detectives began with the simplest questions, as they should, the ones that always come first. Where was she last seen? Where had she been that night? Who was the last person known to be with her? They traced her final movements backwards, step by step, and hour by hour. The taxi ride, the bar, closing time. Every answer pointed to the same place: Bronco's bar. And somewhere between last call and a ride home, Virginia Jackson just vanished. Now, just days after Virginia disappeared, something else appeared. On September 30th, her brother-in-law was traveling along a farm road that led toward her house, and it was a road that he'd driven countless times before. It was familiar, and it was unremarkable to him. And then he saw it. A pile of clothing lying just off the road. At first, it didn't register as evidence of anything. Clothes get dumped. People litter. You notice it and you move on. There was no reason for him in that moment to believe that it meant something more. Virginia was missing, yes, but missing people don't automatically lead your mind to roadside discoveries. Not right away, at least. So the image stayed filed away, unresolved, until time did what time often does in cases like this. It sharpened that question instead of dulling it. Weeks later, with Virginia still gone, that memory came rushing back to him. By October 18th, the clothing no longer felt accidental. It felt very wrong. He contacted law enforcement. When officers searched the area, what they found didn't look like a single moment of loss. It looked like a trail. One item at a time, scattered along the road, as if someone had been shedding pieces of a life while moving through the darkness. Hair clips, a cell phone, panties, a pillow, a sweatshirt, a sock. Every item belonged to Virginia Jackson. What had once seemed random now told a story, one that didn't end at the road. It led farther out, and so the search widened. are sometimes discoveries that change your day, and then there are discoveries that change everything. On the morning of October 19th, 1995, two deer hunters were moving through a wooded area off of an old logging road near the Houston-Dixon County line. It was the kind of place that people went to be left alone, quiet, overgrown, far from houses or traffic. They weren't looking for anything unusual until they saw the ground disturbed. Something just wasn't right about the earth ahead of them. The soil looked turned and very unnatural. As they moved closer, the outline of human form became impossible to ignore. They had found a body. Law enforcement was called, and the woods were quickly transformed from hunting land into a crime scene. The body was identified as Virginia Jackson. She was nude. Her remains were decomposing, exposed to weeks of weather and time. She had been partially buried in a shallow grave, concealed just enough to delay discovery, but not enough to hide what had been done. Her body lay face down. Her head was missing. So was her left hand. In that remote stretch of woods, the search for a missing woman ended, and a homicide investigation began. The condition of Virginia Jackson's remains were carefully examined by two experts. Dr. Murray Marks, a forensic anthropologist who assisted in disinterring the body, and Dr. Charles Harlan, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy. What they found told a very complicated story, one shaped by time and exposure and intent. There was, of course, evidence of animal activity. She had been out there for weeks. That much was undeniable. Wildlife had reached parts of her body after death. But animal activity did not explain everything. Dr. Harlan testified that several injuries were very precise and clean and purposeful, marks that were very inconsistent with scavenging or natural decomposition. He described sharp incisions to both the front and the back of the neck. The trachea had been severed. The hyoid bone, a small but very critical bone in the throat, had been cut. The cervical vertebrae showed clear disarticulation. These were not random tears. They were controlled cuts. Virginia's torso had also been opened with a very sharp instrument, the incision running cleanly from sternum to navel, exposing her internal organs beneath. Alongside that main incision were several smaller superficial cuts. Dr. Harlan testified that these injuries were inflicted after her death. Not the chaos of a struggle, not wounds caused by fear of resistance, but deliberate acts carried out once her life had already ended. So this means it was just some sick, sadistic, twisted, morbid curiosity or desire that he needed to fulfill, as if this wasn't horrific enough. The missing head raised another very critical question. Dr. Murray Marks acknowledged that in some circumstances, animals could account for post-mortem dismemberment, but Dr. Harlan disagreed. Based on the condition of the remains, he concluded that a human being, not an animal, had removed Virginia's head. Despite the extensive injuries, the exact cause of death could not be determined from the remains alone. What could be determined with absolute certainty was this: Virginia Jackson did not die by accident. She did not die of natural causes. She was the victim of a homicide. Now, based on the degree of decomposition, Dr. Harlan testified that her death likely occurred within 24 hours of leaving Bronco's bar, placing the end of her life firmly within the same night that she accepted that ride home. The timeline was tightening, and the window for who could be responsible was closing. Before the night that Virginia Jackson disappeared, Jerry Ray Davidson lived a very unremarkable life by most accounts. He worked as a janitor at St. Thomas Hospital, assigned to a department where surgical instruments were cleaned and maintained. Now, it wasn't glamorous work, but it required reliability. And by all outward measures, Davidson had been very reliable. That was until September 26th, 1995. After that night, the routine stopped. Davidson did not return to work for his next scheduled shift. He didn't call to explain his absence. He didn't notify anyone that he would be gone. Days passed. Now, when he still hasn't come home, concern spread beyond his workplace. On October 2nd, Jerry Ray Davidson's mother contacted police and filed a missing persons report for her son. At that point, even his family didn't know where he was or why he had disappeared so suddenly. And then, days later, the situation shifted yet again. Jerry called his mother. He was alive. He was able to make contact. That missing persons report was withdrawn. But the reassurance of him being alive was very short-lived. Davidson didn't return to his normal life. He didn't resume work, and he didn't stay at home. He came back to his mother's house briefly, once to spend the night, and another time only long enough to retrieve a camper top for his pickup truck. And then, just as abruptly as he disappeared the first time, he was gone again. No explanations, no notice. Now, as investigators would later testify, his movements during those weeks did not reflect someone simply taking time away. They reflected someone leaving and not wanting to be found. Between October 4th and October 6th, a woman named Melinda Jones noticed something that stayed with her. She lived along Old Yellow Creek Road in Dixon County, a quiet stretch of road where you notice the vehicles that pass, especially the ones that do not belong. During those days, Melinda Jones saw a red pickup truck moving down the road. What caught her attention was not just the truck, it was the speed. The vehicle was moving unusually slow enough to make her stop and watch it as it passed. It didn't feel like someone searching for an address or enjoying the scenery. It felt very deliberate. And as the truck came closer, Melinda could see inside. In the passenger seat was a large object, tightly wrapped in white, rising to just about the height of the driver's shoulder. It wasn't shaped like luggage. It didn't sit naturally in the seat. And as she watched, the object tipped over, falling toward the driver. Melinda Jones saw the man behind the wheel, later identified as Jerry Ray Davidson, and he pushed the object back into place. The moment passed, but it didn't ever leave her. Now, later that same evening, Melinda Jones saw that same red truck again, this time traveling in the opposite direction, and this time moving very fast. Gone was the careful crawl. Gone was the hesitation. It sped past her home and disappeared down the road. Only later would the full weight of that sighting become clear. Virginia Jackson's body would be discovered just 1.5 miles from Melinda's home, along that same stretch of land. What had seemed unsettling in the moment would soon become very haunting for her. In the days after Virginia Jackson disappeared, Jerry Ray Davidson began to appear in public again, but not in ways that seemed ordinary. At Kim's One-Stop Market, not far from Old Yellow Creek Road, Davidson walked in wearing work pants, his clothes caked with dirt up to the waist. He sat at a table, holding a cup of coffee, and stayed there for nearly an hour, motionless and absolutely quiet. Witnesses later recalled his appearance vividly. It was as if he'd been digging in the ground, moving through soil and mud without any concern for how he looked or where he might go next. The dirt marked him. It made him stand out, and it made people take notice. A week or so later, Jerry Ray Davidson stopped at the Lakeview Tavern in Cumberland City. Bartender Darla Harvey remembered him very clearly. He arrived in the same dirty clothes, and his truck was covered with a camper top that had been spray painted red. Inside the truck, Harvey noticed a shovel, a chain, and several Rubbermaid containers. The vehicle was very messy, she later testified, like he had been living in it. Now, from the moment that he walked in, Darla Harvey felt that something was wrong. Her instincts told her to stay alert and to watch him closely. She even kept a gun within reach, ready in case her unease was justified. As Jerry Davidson moved around the tavern, silent and watching and not interacting with anyone, Harvey said later, "Something wasn't right. My gut told me this is not okay." It was a simple human instinct, a warning that danger had arrived, quiet and patient and watching. And in the days that followed, Harvey's fear would prove that her instincts were correct. When law enforcement finally confronted Jerry Ray Davidson, the story he told was confusing and inconsistent and unsettling. At first, he denied giving Virginia Jackson a ride at all. He insisted that he had no involvement in her disappearance, presenting a calm, almost casual demeanor. But as the questioning continued, his story began to shift. Suddenly, he said, "Oh yeah, I dropped her off at a Kroger grocery store." Then, in a different version, he claimed that he had driven to Nashville that night and stayed there until the wee early hours of the morning. Each explanation contradicted the last, leaving investigators frustrated but also very wary. Then came the speculation. Jerry Ray Davidson offered a theory that made the hairs on the back of every officer's neck stand straight up. He said, maybe somebody got her and chained her to a tree. Then he went on further. He suggested that her hands and her head would probably be missing, the very injuries later confirmed by forensic examination. When detectives pressed him about the head and about the missing pieces of her body, he said something that was almost casual in its horror. "Well, I haven't told you that I killed her yet." Those words lingered in the room. They revealed not panic, not remorse, but deliberate acknowledgement of the unthinkable. It's like he thought he was playing a cat and mouse game, never thinking that they would catch him. For investigators, it was a moment that absolutely solidified their suspicion. Davidson was no longer just a witness or a person of interest. He was now directly tied to the crime by his own words. When investigators searched Jerry's car and his belongings, the picture that emerged was disturbed in its detail. On his person, officers found firearms and knives, handcuffs, and ammunition, tools that could be used for violence lying quietly at his side. And inside the truck, the scene grew even more alarming. Investigators discovered a passenger seat that had been cut and modified with chains and locks arranged to restrain someone. And then there was something far more damning: traces of blood. DNA testing later confirmed that the blood did not match Davidson, but instead matched Virginia Jackson. At the site of the shallow grave, officers uncovered additional evidence connecting Jerry Ray Davidson to the crime. Receipts from his own bank account, placing him in the area near the time of her disappearance. An Ozark Trails tent linked to his truck and his campsite, and personal items that had belonged to Virginia Jackson. The odds that that blood in his truck could have belonged to anyone other than Virginia Jackson? 1 in 265,000. The evidence was no longer circumstantial in the minds of the investigators. It painted a clear and terrifying picture. Wherever Virginia had gone, Davidson had been there, and the trail he left behind could not be ignored. Now, during the trial, Davidson's defense team worked to introduce doubt wherever they could. They argued that Virginia Jackson might have died from an overdose of alcohol or prescription medication. They questioned the autopsy itself, suggesting that it had been mishandled and that the conclusions drawn from it were unreliable. And they scrutinized the DNA testing, raising the possibility that it could have been misinterpreted or flawed. I mean, in other words, they were grasping for straws here. Each argument was designed to make the jury pause, to reconsider, to ask if there was any explanation other than Davidson's guilt. But as the evidence unfolded in that courtroom, it became clear that no single piece of proof stood alone. It was the totality of all of the evidence that spoke. The blood in the truck, the modified passenger seat, the items at the grave, the witness sightings, and Davidson's own shifting statements. I mean, they all fit together in a way that left very little room for doubt. The jury didn't just see the fragments of the story. They saw the whole picture, every detail, every link, every trail. And together, it told a story that only one person could have written. After weeks of testimony and evidence and arguments, the moment of reckoning arrived. The jury considered the charges: first-degree premeditated murder and aggravated kidnapping. As the sentencing phase began, the full weight of Jerry Ray Davidson's past was placed before them. Jurors heard of his prior convictions for sexual violence, a history that painted a darker context for the crime against Virginia Jackson. They were asked to weigh the aggravating circumstances, that Davidson had committed violent felonies before, that the murder occurred during the commission of a kidnapping, and that he had mutilated her body after death. Each fact was deliberate, and each detail was very chilling. Together, they told the jury that this was not a crime of impulse or accident. It was calculated and cold and horrific. After careful deliberation, the jury reached their decision, and the punishment was clear: the death penalty. For Virginia Jackson, justice, harsh and unflinching, was pronounced. And for Jerry Ray Davidson, the full measure of the law had finally arrived. Even after the courtroom lights dimmed and the jury handed down the death sentence, the story of Jerry Ray Davidson did not end. The law moves slowly and deliberately especially in a case this dark. In 2014, nearly 2 decades after his conviction, the Tennessee Supreme Court reviewed Davidson's case once again. They confirmed that, yes, he was guilty of murder and aggravated kidnapping. The conviction stood, but the court also found a critical flaw. So, during his original sentencing, Jerry Ray Davidson's attorneys had failed to present evidence of his mental and cognitive impairments, a constitutional requirement in capital cases. Because of this oversight, the court vacated his death sentence. The ruling did not free him. It did not erase what had been done, but it meant that the death penalty would no longer apply, and a new sentencing hearing was ordered. In the years that followed, Davidson continued to fight for relief through the courts. He sought post-conviction review in Tennessee, challenging certain aspects of the trial, but the courts denied his petitions, reaffirming that while his death sentence was removed, the convictions themselves remain intact. Davidson also took his fight to the federal courts, filing a habeas corpus petition in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. The petition, filed as recently as December 2025, sought to challenge elements of his trial and his confinement. Through these filings, Jerry Ray Davidson continued to assert his rights, but the law, as it stands, keeps him behind bars. As of today, he remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Now, when I was researching this case, I found comments from people in the area of Dickson County, and I thought some of them were worth sharing. Tiffany Ashmore commented on a post regarding Virginia, stating that her grandmother actually owned the bar at that time, and that they were all shocked because Jerry Ray Davidson was a regular patron of the bar, even staying until closing and walking the bartenders to their cars for safety. It could have easily been one of them too. Another mentions that there was an additional missing persons case that was never solved in Dickson County. A beautiful young woman named Martha Green vanished from her brother's car while he walked to get gas in 1987. And this guy rightfully wonders if Jerry Ray Davidson could have been connected to her disappearance as well. The man who once walked freely through the streets of Dickson County, who offered that fateful ride to Virginia Jackson, now spends his days in the confines of prison. The case may continue in courtrooms and legal briefs, but for Virginia Jackson, justice, though delayed, remains unbroken. As the shadows stretch across the quiet roads of Dickson County, Tennessee, it's easy to fool yourself into thinking the danger is gone. Somewhere out there, Virginia's head and hand remains. And remember, sometimes evil does not announce itself. It waits patiently. It sits quietly beside you, watches and moves when you're not looking. It walks you to your car for your own safety. Virginia Jackson's life was stolen in a night that began like any other. A cab ride declined, a stranger offered a lift. A simple choice with consequences too horrific to imagine. Jerry Ray Davidson will never walk those roads again. He remains locked behind bars, but the violence that he inflicted will never be erased. The missing head, the mutilated body, the shattered life, they all remain, haunting memories of those left behind. And somewhere in the stillness of ordinary places, in the quiet of a bar, in the back of a truck, the echoes of that night linger, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to realize that evil doesn't always look evil. So listen closely, pay attention, and remember that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who smile and sit quietly and wait for the night to fall. This episode, Silent Passenger, was written and hosted by me, Tiffany Morgan, and produced by Main Street Media. Background music and theme song by John T. Productions. Research support from Court Archives and Murderpedia.org. If you would like to sponsor an episode of Tennessee True Crime, we would love to partner with you. Our sponsors keep our shows funded and running. To support Tennessee True Crime, follow us on Facebook at Tennessee True Crime and Instagram at TN True Crime. You can find case and evidence photos on those socials. If you have a case that you're interested in me covering, please feel free to email me at tntruecrime@mainstreetmedia.llc or send me a message on any of those socials. It's truly an honor that some of you have reached out and asked me to cover cases of your loved ones. Join me next week as we uncover another Tennessee case that left a very lasting mark. Because here in Tennessee, we never stop telling the stories that matter. And some secrets we refuse to let stay buried. Tune in next time on Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime. Dark tales in the mountains where the mist won't lie, echoes of the fallen under starless skies. Hear the hush of memory, the voice of the unsaid. This is Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows tread.